All right, I hope you've all refilled your drinks and are liberally imbibing. My name is Tina Shepardson. I am an associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies. And I think this slide sort of says it all. I work on 4th century history of Christianity, and it's surprisingly hard to find good pictures of 4th century Christians. Fortunately, there's Memphis. So this is exactly the kind of thing that 4th century Christians were doing. They are, in fact, conflating religion and politics. So there are examples of efforts to control contested places all around us. People like to control things. Controlling things makes some people happy, such as the American moon landing, and other people very unhappy. But more relevant to my work was religious places, which are often at the center of these kinds of controversies, such as in Jerusalem. My work is on 4th century Syria, and currently the project is called Controlling Contested Places, 4th century Antioch and the Spatial Politics of Religious Controversy. So I traveled to Turkey and Syria. That's me in the middle there in the Euphrates River in UT Orange, I'd like to point out for the administrators. This slide shows the complicated politics of 4th century theology. The famous Council of Nicaea is at the top, and this leads to the Nicene Creed. The blue people supported the winners, the orange people supported the losers, and you can see that it goes back and forth for decade after decade with the definition of Christian orthodoxy or Christian truth hanging in the balance. In the city of Antioch, we have at one point multiple different bishops, at one point 4 different bishops assigned to the same city. Now, you may know only one bishop can be in charge of any given city. So this controversy, I'm going to show how Bishop Meletius and John Chrysostom manipulated Antioch's topography to help their cause. I argue that the physical manipulation of places helped to shape the development of religious doctrine and practices in Antioch. And during a period when Meletius wasn't in control, he built a special church, a new church, to compete with the famous Great Church. And to do this, even though the church was much smaller than the imperial great church, he used saints' relics, such as here. These are powerful objects related to saints that can be said to work miracles, have a lot of power associated with them, and therefore are good for drawing a good crowd to your church. So even though the church was smaller, he moved the relics of Saint Babylas from Antioch to his new smaller church, and he himself was later buried there, so that even though the church was not as big as the imperial great church, his small church was still able to draw a very large congregation by physically changing the landscape. I also argue that the rhetorical manipulation of places helped to shape the development of religious doctrine and practices. And specifically in Antioch, Meletius' protege, John Chrysostom, tried to improve the standing of his church by denigrating the Jewish synagogue and pagan temples in efforts to Christianize Antioch's people and its landscape. The problem, according to John Chrysostom, is there are some who think that the synagogue is a holy place, and it's necessary to say a few words to them. Namely, do not run to the synagogue. You enter the Jews' impure places, set foot into their unclean front doors, and share in the table of demons. He continues referring to, quote, the evil power that dwells in the synagogue, and says the synagogue is not only a brothel, but also a den of thieves and a lodging for wild beasts. When God abandons a place, that location becomes the dwelling of demons. I've put some demons there on the bottom for you. He says that since today the Jews, who are more difficult than any wolves, are about to surround my sheep, it is necessary to spar with them and fight, so that none of us might be conquered by the beasts. Do you walk outside the fold and not fear the lion? If you separate from the herd, that one will surely snatch you. And I chose a particularly vicious lion there. Do not shudder to assemble with possessed people and those who have so many unclean spirits who were nursed amid slaughter and murder. In their synagogue stands an invisible altar of deceit on which the Jews sacrifice not sheep and cows, but rather human souls. And you can see the vitriol of this powerful language. Meletius and Chrysostom were not alone in these efforts. In the countryside outside of Antioch, monks were destroying pagan temples, and elsewhere in the empire, Christian leaders were engaged in similar transformations of the empire's religious topography. They were ultimately successful, and Nicene Christianity became the Christianity of the empire, with the Nicene Creed as part of its long-term implications. And I've put the Greek here for you in case there's anyone here who wants to read it. All modern-day Christians are, in some sense, then ancestors of Bishop Meletius and Chrysostom, and all of the blue side on that earlier slide who supported the outcome of the Council of Nicaea. We also inherit long-term a Christianized culture from the Roman and Byzantine Empire, rather than one predominantly pagan or Jewish. And I argue that physical and rhetorical manipulations of places are important to that history in reshaping our understanding of the 4th century and have important implications for today. We hear a lot of rhetoric still around us demonizing and valorizing places, trying to influence people and places and how they act in them. For example, the evil empire, the land of the free, the axis of evil. And being aware makes it easier to resist and or intervene in efforts to shape perceptions of places. Likewise, there's no question we still physically manipulate places, such as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The example of Antioch suggests that one only wins this battle with aggression and power, and efforts at seeking peace must find a way other than the forceful takeover and redefinition of the land. Finally, there's no question that inter- and intra-religious schisms are still disrupting political unity, such as in Iraq. The example of Antioch suggests that one only wins this game by erasing the other, and that if you're seeking coexistence, you can't rely on opposed religious identities, Sunni versus Shi'i, as your primary political or national identity. So this Memphis church I started with is a clear effort to shape culture and identity through a manipulation of the landscape that cannot be called subtle. But what about lighted Christmas trees on top of UT buildings? What about the religious rhetoric of presidential campaigns? 4th century Antioch calls us to be attentive to the role of places in the complex negotiations of identity, religion, and politics. Thank you.